Blizzard used to be famous for their absolutely mind-blowing cinematics, and today we're gonna rank them. There are 41 pre-rendered cinematics in the StarCraft saga, and they range from epic to epilogue. So let's take a look at them, talk about why they're mostly awesome, and maybe get a bit of insight onto why things sometimes get a little bit weird.
I love you, Sarge.
Let's begin with the game introduction cinematics. These are the big budget, high impact powerhouses, so I'm sure they're all gonna be great. Unfortunately, the StarCraft 1 opening cinematic starts off a bit on the wrong foot.
Damn, you're ugly.
It's a fairly famous fact that after StarCraft's first public showcase, the fan reception to the game was awful, and the entire game was redesigned from the ground up. This opening cinematic was designed for the original StarCraft, not the one that we got. So it introduces a bunch of characters who end up being nobodies, and really confusingly, there's a character named Jim in the cinematic who's not Jim Raynor. These characters are salvaging some Terran debris, which was a core mechanic in the original StarCraft, but then in the revamp was stripped from the game. And then a carrier just pops up and randomly murders all these people, even though we learn later that Tassadar was intentionally letting humans escape Chowsara when it was purified. The introduction to Terrans as rednecks works great, but the remainder of this cinematic is just confusing. As a result, I can't give it any higher than C tier. There's a reason that most people completely forget that this cinematic even exists. Blizzard had two opportunities to make an opening cinematic for StarCraft 1, the second being for the Brood War expansion. And wow, did they recover well.
Where is the air support?
The introduction of the United Earth Directorate is stunning. It sets up a series of questions that will take over half of the expansion to unravel, and the shots of both the troops on the field and the Alexander floating above are excellent. Everything showcases how Brood War is taking what made StarCraft great and is going above and beyond with it. An easy A tier. And I'm just gonna get this out of the way now. I really like battlecruisers. They look so sick. And for a 1998 cutscene, this shot is so good. Jumping 12 years into the future with the release of StarCraft 2 comes the deal, a cinematic that is absolutely iconic.
Make no mistake. War is coming. With all its glory. And all its horror.
Compared to the upcoming cutscenes, the deal is not as action-oriented, mostly consisting of Tychus being put into his marine suit. It existed not only to start off StarCraft 2, but to give the community validation for waiting over a decade. The deal is another easy A tier.
Hell, it's about time.
Before we move on, I need to talk about S tier. When it comes to tier lists, I am an S tier purist. I think that a proper tier list has roughly a Gaussian distribution with very little belonging in the S tier. For this video, I'm only going to award S to the cutscenes that are the best of the best in action, characterization, and plot. And without a doubt in my mind, Swarm is an easy S tier.
Armies will be shattered. Worlds will burn.
Swarm is not only the best action sequence in StarCraft, but one of the best sci-fi action sequences in general. It perfectly represents what it means to be Zerg. An overwhelming number of units supported by titanic behemoths, crushing over their enemy like a wave. An enemy that doesn't lose because they're dumb, or because they're weak, or because they're arrogant. They lose because of Swarm. Exactly how it should be. The final intro cinematic is Unity from Legacy of the Void. Being a follow-up back to Swarm is incredibly difficult, and Unity does not disappoint. Much smaller in scale, we focus on a small group of Templar beginning the Protoss invasion to retake their homeworld of Ire from the Swarm. Every piece of action is impeccable. But of course, one of the most iconic moments is the Archon. Everything about Unity is fantastic. If Swarm didn't exist, this would probably be taking its place in S tier. But there is no shame sitting in the highest pinnacle of the A tier.
Today, we retake our homeworld. And with it, our legacy.
So the first intro cinematic to StarCraft was kind of weak, but the first mid-campaign cinematic, Wasteland Patrol, is absolutely iconic.
Looks like you mashed some poor fella's dog, Sarge.
It's a Zerglin, Lester. Smaller type of Zerg.
A lot of StarCraft 1 cinematics are less plot-oriented and more about world building, and Wasteland Patrol does that excellently. It's a good introduction to both the Terran and the Zerg. A tier. The Downing of NORAD 2 is a quick cinematic that was made during the final days of the game's production. It's also the first time we get to see a battlecruiser, which is always a big bonus. If you've ever noticed here that the scale is funny, it's because it was originally a different ship that was swapped out for a battlecruiser at the last minute, which is why we see these Scourge that are apparently 150 meters long. Lore inconsistencies aside, it's pretty decent. B tier. Open Rebellion starts right after the revolt against the Confederacy begins. The Wraith Fighters are cool, but this cinematic highlights one of StarCraft 1's major flaws. They consistently cut away from the action right before a major thing happens, and I understand why they did it. They were still learning at that point how to do combat scenes, but it happens pretty often and it gets old fast. C tier. At the end of the Terran campaign, the Confederacy has been defeated, and Jim Raynor has broken off from the Sons of Korhal after Mengsk's betrayal. And to celebrate our victory, we get the inauguration.
While we battle one another, divided by the petty strife of our common history, the tide of a greater conflict is turning against us, threatening to destroy all that we have accomplished. It is time for us as nations and as individuals to set aside our long-standing feuds and unite.
This is the moment where it all starts to click. The entire first act of StarCraft was a ruse. There was no high-minded idealism or fighting against tyranny. This is the moment it became apparent that StarCraft is something different. Not the simple hero's journey that we've been told a million times over. The best looking, longest, and most impressive cinematic so far is dedicated to the victory of our enemies. How we were used not to fight tyranny, but to unwittingly create it. It clearly conveys Mengsk's ability to provide a sense of comfort and security, how his vapid words can be as powerful as any fleet. The inauguration justifies Mengsk's rule and shows how our failures helped create it. The only place it can go is an S tier.
From that throne, I shall watch over you. From this day forward, let no human make war upon any other human. Let no Terran agency conspire against this new beginning, and let no man consort with alien powers. And to all the enemies of humanity, seek not to bar our way, for we shall win through, no matter the cost.
Moving into the Zerg campaign comes the Dream. It's a bunch of wavy shots of Char and Zerg stuff, and then Kerrigan says, Jimmy. The cinematic was made in a day, and it shows. I really don't like it because A, it's boring, and 2, it spoils what's in the Chrysalis. It gets C tier, and the only reason it's not lower is because it has establishing shots of Char and stuff. If the Dream was low effort, the Amerigo shows where all the budget was being put, because this one is a banger.
Thank God for cold fusion.
This is by far the most technically complex and impressive cinematic from the original StarCraft. The idea was that they wanted to have a self-contained story that you could show somebody, and then they go, whoa, this video game is so cool, I'm gonna go buy it. And it worked, they nailed it. The environment of a dark hallway battle against the Zerg is clearly inspired from Aliens, and the cinematography from the shootout in the movie Heat. It's both a well-crafted homage to those films, as well as a great piece of StarCraft. A tier. The warp is a weird one. The entire scene exists to explain how Zerg do faster than light travel, but personally, I don't really care. A line or two explanation would have been more than enough for me. It really isn't worth a cinematic in my opinion. C tier. The final Zerg cinematic is the Invasion of Ire, where they felt like it was super important to explain how the Overmind travels this time. After he blasts in from orbit, the remainder of the cinematic is a series of shots showing the ruined Protoss homeworld dominated by the Swarm. It's not too bad, though it does linger for a little bit. This is gonna be a B tier. Now that we're Protoss, it's time for the Fall of Phoenix. I find this one kind of sad. The original cutscene was made as a random Hydralisk versus Zealot, which was later slotted in as the death of an important character, and I don't think it does him justice as a result. And because it wasn't designed for the story, it was just a bunch of random things added together, like how we go from an in-game jungle world of Antioch to a desert, and why there are human skulls sitting around. And on top of it, once again, the action cuts off before things happen. It's an unfortunate C tier. Phoenix deserved better.
Phoenix! No.
The ambush was another cutscene that was made first and then slotted into the campaign later. I actually kind of like how the Terran have this weird rocket launcher tech that we've never seen before. It kind of feels like the nobodies at an outpost being told to use this 50-year-old stock. But similar to the opening cutscene, it was made at a time that the Protoss and Terran were much more hostile to each other than they ended up being. As a result, they had to jam a random Terran base into the corner of the next mission that you might not even notice. B tier. The return to Ire is a cool little shot of the Hyperion and a Protoss armada. It's also about 15 seconds long. B tier. The death of the Overmind is a hard one to judge. On a conceptual basis, the idea of Tassadar channeling both the Kala and the Void, sacrificing himself to defeat the Overmind and destroy the Zerg, is good. The problem comes with context. I wouldn't be surprised if a plurality of players are sitting here watching Tassadar sacrifice himself while going, "My brother, we already killed everything with a mass of carriers and battle cruisers. We are fine. You don't need to do this." As a result, the idea is cool and the execution is good, but it doesn't particularly flow with the mission that preceded it. B tier. With the Overmind slain, we've made it to StarCraft Brood War. There are only 3 cinematics in this game, one for the end of each campaign, and 2 of them are absolutely incredible. And the other is Fury of the Xel'Naga. This isn't bad by any means. Zeratul and Artanis get to the Xel'Naga temple, ride the elevator, and give the temple the vitamins and minerals that it craves. But it doesn't do anything special either. As a funny little aside, for some reason, YouTube is convinced that my second channel, Giant Grant Games Archives, just owns this cinematic. It sends me a copyright flag alert every single time that someone uploads it onto YouTube. I have pages and pages of this, and I just want it to stop. Anyway, Fury of the Xel'Naga gets B tier. The end of the UED campaign fittingly gives us the UED victory report, and I adore it.
Zerg! The very mention of this terrifying race once brought fear to all who heard it. But now we can all rest easy, as our own forces now occupy their very homeworld of Char.
The idea of making a Cold War era propaganda film is brilliant. It does an excellent job at recapping the events of the UED campaign while spinning things from their side. It's camp done well. A tier. The ending to StarCraft Brood War is Ascension, a cinematic broken into 2 distinct parts. First comes Kerrigan's gloating as she declares herself the very cool and very powerful leader of the Swarm. She's beaten the Dominion, the UED, and the Protoss. Now the Zerg reign supreme. That part is well and fine, but the perspective shifting to Admiral Dugal is where everything changes.
Dearest Helena, by now the news of our defeat has reached the Earth.
When I was chatting with my friend Subsorian about this project, he said something about Ascension that puts it better than I ever could. He said the ending of Brood War was ambitious, even for its time. I don't think we'll ever get another major title that's willing to end on such a downer. Even Warcraft 3 ended with a triumphant darkness. not a defeated man at his end, mourning the hubris that led to the death of his comrades and his best friend. Blizzard knew what story they wanted to tell and were willing to take a risk, defying conventional storytelling wisdom to do it. And for that, Ascension deserves a very strong A tier.
You will never see me again, Helena. Tell our children that I love them, and that their father died in defense of their future. Over.
The Prophecy is the first time we get to see a prolonged combat cinematic in StarCraft 2 with the showdown between Kerrigan and Zeratul. And it's pretty dang cool. Personally, I love when Zeratul chops the claw off of the Hydralisk, catches it, and then uses it as a weapon. Zeratul's over-the-top theater kid style is great. It's a bit slow compared to later cinematics, but I think that's fine. It is still a blast. A tier. In The Betrayal, we get to see a flashback of Kerrigan being abandoned to the Zerg on Tarsonis, this time including Mengsk's perspective. Infesting Kerrigan came surprisingly late into StarCraft 1's story development, and it wasn't actually planned during her initial abandonment. So I'm glad they decided to revisit the event, given it has progressed from a random plot point to maybe the single most important thing that happens in all of StarCraft. The Betrayal is a good cinematic, but it doesn't deliver anything new. B tier. The showdown is the end of Wings of Liberty and Tychus' story. And, okay, the last video I made was literally a 3-hour Wings of Liberty retrospective that was leading up specifically to this cinematic. If you want my detailed thoughts, go watch that. There's nothing I can say here that I haven't already. It's great storytelling for Tychus, A tier. With the intro cutscene Swarm being one of the few S tiers, it is shocking how dramatic of a drop Hopes and Dreams is. Kerrigan is undergoing tests in an Emojan facility, and she is utterly obsessed with destroying Mengsk. Jim then says,
"Forget Mengsk. Forget all of it. This is about you and me."
This is only a few weeks after he sent hundreds of his men to die fighting to broadcast Mengsk's crimes. Everything Jim says here is a complete betrayal of what he told his men in Wings of Liberty. Kerrigan may be the ghost, but the greatest character assassination in the series was done by Jim to himself. F tier. Get It Together is a cinematic that has me split, because this introduction shot is absolutely stunning. Whoever was in charge of battlecruiser duty in Heart of the Swarm gets an A+. The rest of the cutscene is really weak though. The Dominion invade, get blasted by Kerrigan, Jim and her flirt, and if the romance was written well, it could work, but it wasn't, so it doesn't. C tier. The third in this rapid-fire series of cutscenes is Choices. Kerrigan escapes to the Hyperion, where Matt and Valerian Mengsk tell her that they couldn't rescue Jim, and she throws a tantrum. Suddenly, a fleet of Dominion battlecruisers warp in, and a pretty good space battle happens. The raiders have to retreat, and Kerrigan decides to return to the surface to find Jim. At first, I didn't really like this cutscene. Kerrigan seemed to completely overreact, until I realized that she has a very personal experience being abandoned planetside by a Mengsk. I think they could have been slightly more on the nose with it. Maybe Kerrigan tells the crew that they have to go back and get Jim, and then a rushed Valerian says to belay that order they have to get out of here, and then she explodes with anger. But overall, it's a good throwback. B tier. The final of this cluster of cutscenes is Transmission. Kerrigan used the Swarm to destroy a Dominion encampment and is now desperately trying to contact Jim when she hears this.
Interrupt your regularly scheduled programming to bring you this news. Notorious rebel Jim Raynor was captured in a daring raid yesterday. He was briefly interrogated and summarily executed.
Say what you will about the rest of Heart of the Swarm, but this setup is incredible motivation for Kerrigan to reclaim her title as Queen of Blades and go after Mengsk. A tier. In Birthworld, Zeratul sneaks onto Kerrigan's Leviathan to deliver a message, and she proceeds to go ballistic until he uses face grab no jutsu and shows her the primal Zerg.
They fight. They kill. They evolve.
The primals ended up slotting excellently into the greater lore of StarCraft, and I think that's partially because their introduction here was well done. This is a solid B tier. While the introduction to the primals was good, the introduction to Primal Kerrigan was less so. Reborn is fairly uninteresting. Kerrigan hatches out of an egg, is purple, and gets lots of energy everywhere. Oh, so mad and so powerful. This would just be a below average C tier if it weren't for the very end, where they just decide to spoil that Mengsk has the Xel'Naga artifact, ruining the surprise later for a payoff of nothing now. That's lame. D tier. After Kerrigan invades Char and destroys the Dominion defenses, we get Conscience, where General Warfield does what no other character is capable of, calling Kerrigan out.
You bitch. You're not even human anymore. You betrayed us all. For what? Petty revenge? How many innocents have you killed? How many more have to die? What if Raina could see you right now?
I love this cutscene because of Warfield. The game tries to frame it as some redemption moment for Kerrigan where she gets holy lighting for deciding to not slaughter a bunch of near-dead soldiers who were retreating. But as far as I'm concerned, Warfield is a damn hero, and if he has to go out, then this is the way to do it. Conscience gets A tier. Shifting perspectives is not a good cutscene. The fight with Neruda is incredibly weird. Here's some of the concept art that they had for his true form for this fight, and instead of building off any of that, they decided to go with glowy-eyed Jim Raynor? Okay, sure. I do kinda like that Kerrigan uses the Nidus Worm to attack. The Queen of the Swarm actually using the Swarm is nice, but that's about where the compliments end. Duran gets wrecked, Kerrigan gets impaled, and then the story still needs her, so she's fine like 30 seconds later. Also, what does this even mean?
I'm everything you lost. I am everything you never had.
Yeah, sure you are, buddy. D for Duran. Heart of the Swarm has been really inconsistent in quality so far, but for these last couple slots, they're gonna be remarkably consistent. But not in a good way. Believe in Me is where Kerrigan rescues Jim from prison. He realizes that everything and everyone he sacrificed to save her from the Swarm was wasted. So he shoots a wall and it's all good now. This is where we as the players are told that Kerrigan will have no consequences for anything, ever, and the people she killed, they don't matter. And we just have to live with it. Cool. D tier. Heart of the Swarm ends with Ascension, which is a bold freaking move giving it the same name as the fantastic Brood War ending. Kerrigan explodes a Viking, which admittedly looks cool, and then confronts Mengsk. And in a plot twist nobody could have seen coming, he has the Xel'Naga artifact. Wow. Anyway, he shocks Kerrigan and then decides to walk over to this door so a man with a nuclear-powered combat suit can somehow sneak up on him. Kerrigan gives Mengsk the purple nurple, and he explodes. And then this happens.
My pleasure, darling.
I don't know, this sucks. D tier. Reclamation is the first cinematic in Legacy of the Void, and is also a great example of why I consult Subsorian for these videos for extra context. The quick and easy of this is that the Protoss are preparing to retake their homeworld of Ire from the Zerg, when Zeratul appears to tell them that this is a bad idea. And then Selendis is all mad at him because
this heretic cannot be trusted.
This invasion is a distraction from the true battle ahead. Amon's fury will engulf the entire galaxy.
Do not forget that it was his interference that brought ruin to Ire.
all of this makes sense if it weren't for the fact that apparently in a bunch of different media before Legacy of the Void, Selendis and Zeratul have interacted multiple times, and she's always polite, respectful, and reverent of him. And it's not like anyone knew that the Overmind could brain blast the information out of Zeratul when he killed Zaz. He didn't just give it up freely. So the basic idea of the cinematic makes sense, but it randomly retcons Selendis' and Zeratul's relationship into a hostile one, and Selendis is already criminally underused as a character, so I think this is a waste for her. C tier. Chains is the climactic duel between corrupted Artanis and Zeratul. I've heard complaints about this before, that people thought it was weird that Artanis turned all red and spooky here, but it actually checks out lore-wise. Red has always been the color of uncontrolled void-connected psionic energy, as early as Dark Archons in StarCraft 1. By the way, nerve cord cutting has also been in StarCraft 1 since the manual. A lot of people think Legacy of the Void made this stuff up, and it's been there since day one. Overall, the fight is pretty good, and I think it deserves B.
My life for ire.
Never mind, A tier. The Shadow Walk is a Dark Templar ritual where one must prove themselves by successfully navigating a valley of hostiles by showing their mastery of Templar skills. Alone is Artanis' Shadow Walk.
It is said that those of our kind suffer, separated from the glory of the Kala.
The brawl of Artanis against the Zerg as he protects the temple in its last moments while Zeratul narrates is phenomenal. Alone is both the symbolic reunification of High and Dark Templar and a freaking sweet action sequence at the same time. A tier. After the Protoss intervened to save Core Hall from a hybrid assault comes Warriors. A moment where the game pulls back from the action, steps away from the galaxy-spanning threat, and makes things a bit more personal.
Did you know this warrior?
No. But I know his story. I know all their stories.
To me, Warriors is the most human moment in the StarCraft saga. The time that the Terran's greatest hero realizes that there's nothing he can do anymore, that the threat is too great and galaxy-spanning. It's the first time in StarCraft history that Jim passes off the torch to someone else. He gives Artanis a level of respect that he's never given anyone, even Kerrigan. I love the action, the scope, and the scale of StarCraft, but it's the things like this that make me care for and respect the characters. Which is why, for me, Warriors is the third S tier.
It is your custom to shake the hand of a friend, is it not?
Give him hell, Artanis.
In Unlikely Allies, Artanis is reading some Xel'Naga prophecy stuff when suddenly, whoa buddy, it's Kara Sarrigan being beaten up by a hybrid. If Kerrigan could fly, she would do so much better against these melee hybrid, but too bad they never gave her that power. Artanis then proceeds to show the world what lore-accurate Protoss are like until Kerrigan steals the last hit because nobody told her that Heroes of the Storm got rid of that mechanic. I think the fight is decent. I do like that Artanis incorporates warping around into his combat style. Makes it unique. B tier. In Entombed, Kerrigan and Artanis delve the dungeons of Ulnar until they reach a pile of dead Xel'Naga. It turns out that Xel'Naga look really bad, so thankfully Amon uses a vision to taunt them. His host body is being constructed with the form and essence of the Protoss he enslaved and the corpse of the Overmind. Overall, decent points here. It follows through from the purity of form and purity of essence that's been around since StarCraft 1, and uses one of the greatest possible Zergs as the basis for his host body. And of course, that host body looks significantly better than the Xel'Naga design, so I'm glad they're going for it. Now, it would be a darn shame if they decided to not follow through on what this cinematic set up, both by forgetting the ingredients to Xel'Naga and deciding to use the ugly Xel'Naga form for Amon, but that's a crime for later cutscenes. Entombed gets a B. Legacy is another one that is very difficult to rank. Coming at the end of the core Legacy of the Void campaign is the moment Amon's influence is purged from the Protoss. Selendis heroically cuts off her nerve cords, severing her connection to the Khala and inspiring her soldiers to do the same. The problem is that Selendis has never been developed well as a character, so it's not really a strong moment for her. And Artanis vowing the new Protoss society will be unified, ushering in a new golden age, apparently with a dark shrine on every street corner. It's a good ending for StarCraft 2. And it would totally get A tier if it were the ending to StarCraft 2, but it isn't. I too would love to pretend the epilogue doesn't exist, but you can't just toss in an ending that feels like it encompasses the next decade and then 30 seconds later tell us it's actually Amon time. It's weird pacing. B tier. Before we finish off this list, I want you to know that I also don't want to be here in the epilogue, but for some reason they put a lot of effort into these cutscenes, so let's do this. First off is Cycle's End, where people from across the globe can unify to ask, what were they possibly thinking with the design of the Xel'Naga? Seriously, it's like they saw Cthulhu and thought he would be freaking awesome if he was more manatee. The only good part of this entire plot thread is that it turned out that Tassadar wasn't the one speaking to people from the dead, instead it was the blubber boy over here. Anyway, it's time to create a Xel'Naga, and as everybody knows, because the game has repeated it about 200 times at this point, the way you get a Xel'Naga is by mixing Purity of Porpoise and Purity of Human turn Zerg, but then the Zerg gets vacuumed out by an artifact, turn Primal Zerg, but the Primal Zerg doesn't have Purity of Essence, otherwise the Xel'Naga wouldn't have had to uplift the Primal Zerg in the first place. Yeah, I remember them saying that a lot because it rolls off the tongue so well. And Xel'Naga Kerrigan doesn't even look cool, come on! Wait, where's she going? She's gonna be right next to us like 3 seconds later. Why is she blasting off like Team Rocket? I can't. The epilogue is so ridiculous. F tier. Okay, final cutscene. The second epilogue one that I don't even care enough to look up the name for. Remember how Blizzard is famous for their really cool action sequences? Like really stunning stuff sometimes. Wouldn't it be cool if they subverted expectations by having the ultimate big bad boss battle be beaten in 3 seconds by a laser shot to the face while he doesn't fight back? Heck yeah, that would be incredible! The ending to StarCraft 2 is so bad that it caused Jim to start drinking again. Whatever this is called, it gets an F tier. The epilogue is so incredibly disappointing that it would be an awful place to end this video, and I'm not gonna let them do that to us. So instead, Wings of Liberty has a bunch of story beats that are done in-engine. They're all important, but they don't technically fit the rules, so they're not going to make the final ranking here, but let's rapid fire them anyway. When the Hyperion jumps away from Marsara, A tier. Fighting Dr. Hansen and kissing her, B tier and C tier respectively. Jukebox bar fight, B tier. Beating Valerian, B tier. Saving General Warfield, a nice A. And the rallying speech before All In, another A. As I said, those don't count for the final rankings, but for the cinematics that did count, I thought it would be fun to give every game a point total, where F tier cinematics give 0 points, D gives 1 point, C gives 2 points, etc., and see which games had the best average. And it turns out that Brood War and Wings of Liberty are perfectly tied for first place. Third place would have been Legacy of the Void if the epilogue didn't exist, but that drags it down to fourth, with the original StarCraft taking third. And at the very bottom of the barrel sits Heart of the Swarm, which wasn't all bad, but had massive consistency issues. And then Nova Covert Ops doesn't have any pre-rendered cinematics. Obviously this is all based on my subjective opinion, but when I saw the rankings where Brood War and Wings of Liberty were tied, it just felt right, so I'm pretty happy here. But before we go, I wanted to talk about one more hidden StarCraft cinematic that is incredible. A few days before the Legacy of the Void intro cinematic was unveiled, the StarCraft YouTube channel dropped Reclamation. This scene introduces the zealot called Dallas as he speaks with Artanis about the lead up to the invasion of Ire. A soldier and his commander discussing the sacrifices they have to make in order to right the wrongs of Protoss past.
Do you not see the symmetry in this moment? Driving the Dark Templar away was a sin, but today, because you have united us, we fight together. The lives lost tomorrow will be the price of our future.
An easy sentiment from one who is not sending them to die!
From one who is being sent to die. I will be among the first to spill Zerg blood. I am a Kundalar, the tip of the spear.
Reclamation adds an incredible weight to the opening moments of Legacy of the Void and gives focus to Kaldalis, the otherwise unsung hero that gave the Protoss their homeworld back. Reclamation is an easy A tier.
Come back, Artanis. Lead us home.
Kaldalis.
My life for Ire.
My life for Ire.